Hey Glavenus, how you doing?
Oh, I'm alright. The wife and I...
Time to dip you in acid!
Oh, this is fine, actually.
Sorry, is that an acidic Glavenus? Yes, Timmy. That's crazy!
Want to see me do it again?
No! Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, recently we've been alerted to the existence of a crazy and awesome new subspecies coming to Iceborne, the Acidic Glavenus. This creature resides in the Rotten Vale and is the way it is entirely because of the Rotten Vale, which leads to the simple question with a difficult answer. How exactly could the environment of the Rotten Vale specifically affect monsters who do not regularly visit it? Hell, even some old world monsters could come over and find themselves pretty overwhelmed. As a warning before I get too far into it, some of these monsters are going to sound pretty creepy and would probably be a little bit traumatizing to actually see in front of you in the game, but hey, I can't show you them in game anyways, and we've already seen Kezu, so at least there is some precedent for that. Without further ado then, here are my 10 new Rotten Vale based subspecies for Iceborne.
Number 1. Nimbus MIZUTSUNE.
If fun and happiness is what you seek, then you've entered the wrong place. Native to the effluvial portions of the Vale, the Nimbus MIZUTSUNE would actually not function on water, or in fact bubbles at all. In the world where the Acidic Glavenus is pestilence, the Nimbus MIZUTSUNE is death. With special organs that take advantage of effluvium instead of water, this creature still slides, almost floating around on a cloud made purely of the bacterial gas itself. As you could expect, the beams would be replaced by effluvial beams, but the bubbles would now instead be little clouds of effluvium that float in similar patterns. And hitting one of these clouds would instantly give you the miasma debuff. The monster would move much faster than its base counterpart, have a nice deep gray skin color, and very short black hair to replace what was previously a thick coat of vibrant fur. Nimbus MIZUTSUNE would also be extremely aggressive, as with any creature affected by the effluvium, it becomes more aggressive. If this monster came into existence, I wouldn't be sure if I was crying due to fear or from pure joy, because personally, this one would be hell of a fight to behold.
Number 2. Rusted NARGACUGA.
Is it an old car? Is it a hybrid between a cat and a windy elder dragon?
No, it's a switch axe.
Actually, it's none of those especially the third one. Imagine a world in which NARGACUGA go through a similar experience to the Acidic Glavenus, only obviously as a different creature, the effect would be different, right? What I present to you is a subspecies of NARGACUGA, who through frequent interactions with acid, have had the blades of their wings completely rusted over, all but rendering them useless for actually cutting. The acid also burned through all of the fur, so sorry to tell you guys, but this would be a hairless pseudo-cat. With the rusted over blades of the wing and the lack of soft fur to cushion its movements, the rusted NARGACUGA has had to change a large portion of the way it chooses to defend itself. Now using its wings as blunt weapons rather than sharp, and its tail now shooting out little drops of acid that apply defense down instead of the normal tail quill feathered things, this death cat for cutie can pose a real threat to a hunter who expects a normal NARGACUGA. For the most part, his moveset would be significantly slower, though just as agile as before. Every hit would be harder, but a bit slower. Each one would have a lot of emphasis, I guess you could say, just like this fight would have a lot of emphasis on my enjoyment of the Rotten Vale.
Number 3. Big-boned BARROTH.
Have you ever wondered what would happen if you fused a Rotobon and a BARROTH? Well, that is about what I think would happen if you put a BARROTH in the upper sections of the Rotten Vale. Considering BARROTH's tendency to enjoy sticky things and sort of rolling around, I think it is fair to think that he, like Rotobon, would end up totally covered in bones. And yes, I know BARROTH isn't sticky by default, but if you've looked at the bone piles in the Rotten Vale, they do honestly look like they would stick to just about anything that touched them. The monster as a whole then would be a fair bit larger than his basic counterpart, and the crest of the big-boned BARROTH would have an extremely pronounced brow, almost like a caveman. And as you could expect, this BARROTH would be bone white.
Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
The mud-shaking attacks, instead of leaving piles of mud, would simply lob piles of bones off of the BARROTH, which if they hit the hunter would cause bleed, but if not, would simply disappear rather than actually leaving anything dangerous on the floor. This fight wouldn't be very complicated or difficult, but I think thematically it would be really cool, and I would definitely enjoy having this in the game.
Number 4. DANGERSPLOOSH PAOLUMU.
The name's a work in progress. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that PAOLUMU can find their way to the Rotten Vale about as easily as Odogaron can find their way out to the Coral Highlands. What is to stop a PAOLUMU subspecies from developing down in the creepy pits of the New World? Also Odogaron. But imagine he doesn't slaughter them mercilessly because they lived in the acid pool areas of the Rotten Vale where he doesn't visit very often. Imagine these PAOLUMU, instead of an air sac that can release into their neck, they have an acid sac. Obviously immune to their own acid, this PAOLUMU would have pale skin with, again, darker hair. Wait, you said that before! Surprisingly, think for the most part, the monsters that reside in the Rotten Vale definitely stick to a certain theme, at least as far as aesthetics go. So imagine this PAOLUMU, still able to fly in its normal state, and shooting out little globs of acid while airborne, which of course apply defense down. A few weeks ago, I theorized the possibility of an ice PAOLUMU with a flash-freezing liquid sac. That PAOLUMU's neck would have contained a solid at the end of the day. Normal PAOLUMU carries air, which is a gas. DANGERSPLOOSH PAOLUMU, as you may have guessed, puffs up his neck with liquid. This, of course, weighs him the hell down and makes it nearly impossible to fly, but makes the fight significantly less predictable because he rolls like all hell. The PAOLUMU would roll around sideways on his neck at an angle that protects its body, and he would absolutely use his head as a bashing weapon, almost similar to an inflated Zamtrios. What? And for the most part, the DANGERSPLOOSH PAOLUMU would function normally aside from this. I may have only mentioned a couple of changes, but these changes do have a pretty large impact on the fight itself.
Number 5, Skewerer Banbaro.
As in Banbaro who skewers. A tribe of specific Banbaro who also may have enjoyed the acid pools just a little bit too much. The skewer Banbaro are a species that show what kind of changes the acid could have on a monster's biology other than simply adding literal acid. These Banbaro are essentially a degraded version of the regular Banbaro, their fur all but gone, and most notably the horns being physically reshaped from their brethren, almost looking like acid chewed through the regular horns to make their new shape, which to put simply is long and very sharp like a skewer. The skewer Banbaro works similar to regular Banbaro in many ways, as his fight mechanic is in fact picking things up with his horns. However, the way in which he does it is quite different. This monster, instead of leveraging chunks out of the ground and rolling them around, would skewer whatever comes in contact with, and sure, that could still be a reasonably sized rock, but it could also be a dead Gyros or a Legiana corpse. These items build up on the skewer's horns, giving him a larger attack radius and upping the damage of all attacks using his horns, all leading up to a big attack where he slams his head on the floor, dropping off his collection of items and creatures and leaving the zone. This one for me is more about the aesthetics than the idea of the fight itself. Picturing an almost decomposing Banbaro, while quite terrifying, is also a really cool design, at least in my head. Dude.
Number 6, Smokescreen Legiana.
This is where I need to ask for a bit of suspension of disbelief for a little bit. All of the monsters I've come up with here are here because I think they are cool designs more than plausibility, and while I think most of them are possible within lore, there are ones like this, where there simply isn't an area that makes any sense for the monster to be in. A Smokescreen Legiana is an effluvium-based creature, and none of the effluvial-based areas could really support a monster that flies, at least not one that flies like Legiana, and especially not one that flies like the Smokescreen Legiana would. Imagine a jet black Legiana with the gray secondary coloring and patterns, who instead of ice has worked out a nice little symbiosis with the effluvium. Instead of producing gusts of cold air, the Smokescreen Legiana produces clouds of miasma, a number of which would simply sit in the sky and do pretty much exactly as the name implies, and obstruct your vision of the creature as it flies above you. Unacceptable! Whoa, hold up a second. Think about how this could work. Especially in a zone as dark as the Rotten Vale, this would be as close as we could come in Monster Hunter World to invisibility, without getting actual, true, unrealistic invisibility. The interesting part of this monster to me is that the effluvium would be used as a weapon, yes, but that would be quite rare. The general use of the effluvium in this fight from Smokescreen Legiana is to obstruct your vision, both in the air and on the ground. And honestly, aside from this, the fight would be mostly the same. But again, as with any good subspecies, a small amount of change with a large impact on the fight is always the best way to go. Well, I mean, assuming you like the original monster in the first place.
Number 7, Pungent PLESIOTH.
Whether you like the old world's fish father or not, I'm nearly certain that he would be a great monster in the new world. But ignoring base Plesioth,
and nothing of value was lost.
How exactly could a Plesioth subspecies be devised from the parts in the Rotten Vale? Well, I think you know where this one's going, as Plesioth can only truly be Plesioth if he started the fight swimming. Only today, it's in a pool of acid. The Pungent Plesioth is a dull green creature who would have had some prehistoric-looking head fins, making him look a little bit more like a war chief of a band of crazy fish than just some weird, crazy fish. This Plesioth subspecies has multiple layers of scales, which is exactly what allows them to swim in the acid, and over time has actually become evolutionarily literally the reason that the pungent plesioth swim in said acid in the first place, as without the acid dissolving the upper scale layer, it becomes quite hard for this monster to move around. As a result of using the acid to burn off this upper layer though, the monster is followed by a terrible stench, and as the scales themselves don't burn off cleanly as a full layer, it almost looks like the plesioth is beginning to decompose. This smell causes pretty much all prey and predators to avoid it, and as a result, the pungent plesioth needs to work a little bit harder to find food. Instead of a water beam, this finned fun bag would of course shoot acid, which would function similar except for the application of defense down, which would also be applied by his infamous bite. As a whole, this would turn the fight into a bit of a physical bout, but the biggest bright side of fighting him is because it's a video game, at least you don't have to actually smell him.
It's time to stop!
Number 8. Caustic RAJANG.
Oh boy, it's time for some fun! So for a moment, let's forget that this monster existing would mean that the base monkey god would have to make his way to Iceborne, and let's talk about exactly what would happen to a subspecies of RAJANG that lived in the Rotten Vale, fed on Odogaron, and drank acid. Well, first things first, his base fur color is darker. Definitely not black, but darker, more of a gray. Also shorter. His horns would be more of a ram shape, and when enraged, instead of gaining a ton of yellow fur, the Caustic RAJANG would instead have his fur change to an acidic blue, and instead of having it sort of spike up, it almost sort of pushes down, like it's being gelled down by acid. And of course, the color does match said acid in the pools of the Vale. As far as base behavior goes, this monster would have no real reason to be anywhere as close to aggressive as the normal RAJANG, and as such, the Caustic RAJANG is a little bit less muscly than their counterparts, as their food source is nearby and doesn't require competition. And as such, the Caustic RAJANG's life is relatively peaceful. Though once the fight itself is started, this RAJANG is anything but peaceful. The classic Thunder Beam is replaced with a stream of acid, and the most impactful difference being the pinball slam move would now leap behind little pools of acid as well, which damage and apply defense down on contact. The Caustic RAJANG favors the pinball move and no longer throws rocks. If I'm totally honest, the main reason I want this RAJANG is the coloring. I love that mysterious bright blue coloring, and don't even get me started on the armor that this thing would produce.
You just blew my mind.
Number 9. Balsamic BULLDROME.
Vinegar is acidic, and I like alliteration.
That is one big pile of shit.
Alright, so you may be able to guess this one doesn't have a huge amount of depth. Simply a Bulldrome subspecies that has also developed around acid pools. This beast would have beautiful deep navy blue fur and similarly shaped but slightly sharper tusks than a regular Bulldrome. The main change in this Bulldrome comes of course in the fight. And hear me out for a moment, this Bulldrome's charges leave behind acid on the floor.
Say what?
Lines of acid. Standing on them deals ticking damage, while merely touching them applies defense down. The lines stay for a while. Now obviously this isn't going to turn Bulldrome into an apex predator or anything that could even really contend with one, but it turns it from a tier 0 monster into maybe a tier 1. The complexity of the fight would be entirely from organizing the lines and being careful to avoid stepping in them, and while it might not make for a necessarily mind-blowing experience, it would still be a unique fight, and at least I hope, a somewhat fun quest.
Number 10. KAMIKAZE KULU-YA-KU.
Alright, so you know the blue Dalamadur meteor in the Rotten Vale? What about a subspecies of Kulu that live in the vicinity of that meteor and the doubtless other meteors outside of the currently traversable areas of the Rotten Vale? These Kulu would be as dark as the night and actually have no feathers. Not through evolutionary changes, mind you, though through pure choice. You see, the unique part of the KAMIKAZE KULU-YA-KU is that it's, fights with the Dalamadur meteor. It picks it up instead of a rock, and it lights the outer layer of its own skin on fire. Yep. Alright. Well, good? Yeah? Alright. Look, I'm sorry, but picturing a black KULU-YA-KU holding a rock that is literally actively setting it on fire and causing it pain, but he still keeps going and hitting you while screaming his head off, and sorry, it's just absolutely fucking hilarious to me. Alright everyone, I've been Cotton Dinosaur, and these have been my 10 Rotten Vale subspecies. What did you think of them? What other monsters do you think could be created by the Rotten Vale? Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the little notification bell for more, and most importantly, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay sweet. This is the brand new outro to tell you all the things that you do that we love, so let's start with something simple and say, oh, we love your eyes. When they're watching us play video games, when we make a bunch of jokes that are kinda lame, or when they gaze upon our failures as we try to kill the monsters or important news about the kingdom Animalia. Rage, Content, and Hollow are all here, talking about the things you want to hear. So if you want to be the first to hear, like and subscribe and the bell and we'll cheer. Some of you are patrons, even though we are all the noobs and you're the pros. There's nothing we can do to thank you. No, really, there's nothing we could possibly do. Goodbye.